Alright, in this video we're going to go over navigating RStudio as well as Quarto documents. So I'll be switching back and forth between our slides and the RStudio interface. Main thing to know is what are the different sections of RStudio. So you get it downloaded, you open it up, and what you're going to see is something like this. In the top left quadrant is going to be your source window. And this is where you're going to be writing your code. This is where you're going to be writing out in your Quarto documents, where you'd be writing in an R script. You're writing things that you can save and go back to, just like a Word document or something similar. In the bottom left corner is going to be your console. Your console is essentially where things are running. You can also write your code in here, but it's not going to be saved. In the top right quadrant is your environment and your history. So your environment is going to show any variables that you've created, any data frames that you've written, things like that. And it can also show you your history of what you've coded. And then finally, your bottom right quadrant is where your files, plots, packages, and help go. So this is where you're going to double check that you're in the right working directory. You're going to see your plots show up and see if your packages are there. Also, this is where any help that you get is going to come from. So let's go ahead and look at that live on my RStudio platform. So here, I actually have your challenge 1 up. I just finished writing it last night. So we can see in this area is where I'm actually writing my code. This is where I have code chunks. This is where I can, pull in different libraries if I want, right? And this is where the bulk of your work is going to take place. Down here, anytime that I run a code chunk, so let's say, for example, we're pulling in library tidyverse and Polymer Penguins, and don't worry, these things are going to make more sense the farther you get into the videos in the course. You can see that everything is running down here in my console. I can also type code in my console. So let's say I just want to see the Penguins data set that you'll be using in Challenge 1. I can make it pop up there. You can clear your console. So if things get messy down here, if you just want a fresh slate, you can click this little broom button and clean it there. Terminal and background jobs also happen down here. I don't really use these tabs. It's not super important that you understand these. Primarily, you want to see things in your console. This is also where error messages are going to pop up. So if something goes wrong with your code, your errors are going to come up here, and you'll be able to problem solve from there. Up here is your environment. And so this is going to show the different data or the objects that I've created. I can click on them from here. So for example, this is just a basic cars data set that I can see. And I can just make sure that whatever variables, whatever data I'm referencing is in my working environment. This is really important. If something isn't in your working environment, R can't reference it. If you also don't want to have all of these, let's say that you've created a bunch of new data frames, things are getting messy, you can clear it out using this broom. So clear it out, and you can start fresh by pulling in things again with your code. You can also see your history here. I don't use it a ton, but let's say you forgot to save your document and you're like, oh, the last line of code that I wrote was really good. You can go up in here. Definitely the best way to prevent that, though, is, of course, saving as you go. This is also a really important section here. So here is going to be your working directory. I like to think of directories as addresses. So this is telling it, okay, I want to go into my desktops folder. For example, this is a project that I was on, I was a research assistant for, so all of my files with the Coinsights projects are right here. I have a folder for 601 session 1, and I'm going to be creating a folder for 601 session 2 alongside you. But this is where you're going to check and create your working directory. When you create plots, they're going to come up here. You can also export those plots. You can save plots as images or PDFs. You can also double check what packages you have here. And help, if you, I'll teach you how to go through this later, help is going to pop up in your bottom right quadrant. So these are just the basics. You can click up here on this plus, and you can create a new R script. So an R script is just a really basic document that I can put comments in. So I'm going to name this one practice. I can write code, so I can print out hello world, and whatever I print here is going to show up in the console. I can also create a Quarto document, which is what your challenges in your final are going to be. I name it, I'll call this practice. We're gonna call author is me. You can create that here. So this is gonna be your plus up here. You can also play with the different settings up along this top ribbon. If you want to edit your RStudio so that it's dark screen like mine, you can click on Tools, Global Options, and then Appearance, and play with the different themes that you can find there. I always code with a dark screen background because it's easier on the eyes, but you can choose whatever you want. Choose whatever speaks to you. So these are the basics. This is what we're going to be working with. You never have to interact with R directly. So you install R on your computer, but you interact with it through RStudio, which is an IDE. And these are the main quadrants that you want to make sure that you have a handle on. How do I create a new file? How do I create and save code? Where are the variables that I've created? So let's say I want X to be equivalent to 5. That value is going to pop up here in the right hand corner, and now I can reference it. So now I can type X and it's going to pop up in my bottom console. Let's go back to our slides. So the next thing that it's important for you to know is that there is a really excellent textbook that we reference a few times in this course called R Cookbook. Chapter 1, if you're a little confused, reference Chapter 1. It's really, really helpful for the basics of this environment. Working directories, though. Working directories are really, really important. It's one of the foundational things that, you got to get your working directories in order so that way you can have a successful project. And I'm going to show you how to create a new one. When I think of working directory, like I said before, I think of it as an address. So this is where all of your files live, and it's essentially just telling R, okay, go to this address to pull out the data or the files that I need. So we're going to go through that together. We're going to create a new directory for DAX 601 together, and then I want you to put all of your files in there. So anytime you have to download data for this class, anytime you download a challenge, you're going to want to take it, drag it on your desktop or wherever you keep those files from your downloads into this folder. Another thing that's good to think about, the reason why we like to make sure that our working directories are set is because we want to be using relative paths in our challenges and our other produced documents. A relative path means that it just has the data name, whereas an absolute path goes through every part of this address. So I like to think of the data frame name as like the smallest unit of your address that you can get. So specifically like your road number in road, and every time you zoom out, like this is the street number, this is the street, this is maybe the town, this is the state, the zip code, the country, right? We want to get as specific as possible, because if you pull in a code like this, like users Larry desktop, someone else's file path isn't going to be the exact same thing if they were to replicate your code. So I'm going to show you how to create a working directory, right? And just make sure that everything is always working from there. That's going to save you a lot of problems. Another thing, if you want to get and set your working directory, you can use these commands, get working directory and set working directory, and I'm going to show you how to do it manually in RStudio as well. So let's create your 601 project together. I'm creating it now for myself as well, and then I'll be populating it with the materials that I've already created off screen. We're going to go back to our RStudio, and you can see up here I'm currently in my summer session 1 project. I haven't created a new one just because I wanted to record it for you all. When you create a new project, you're going to click on this second green plus with the little ice cube looking thing. You're going to click on that. I'm going to go ahead and save selected here, just so that way the next time I open up my session 1, it's back in the same position that I left it. But we're going to start a new directory. You only have to do this once. You only have to do this once at the start of a course or the start of a project. My practice is that I always start a new project at the very beginning of a course, so DAX 601, DAX 602, whatever. Or if I'm working on a specific project. I showed you guys the Coinsights project really quickly that I've been working on. That has its own directory. And so we're going to call this, I'm going to call it DAX 601 session 2. You can call it DAX 601, whatever you want, but just something that makes sense. Something that is really clear of what exactly it is this directory is a part of. So I'm calling myself DAX 601 Summer 24 session 2. And I'm going to create this project as a subdirectory of my desktop. I like to work from my desktop. I usually, as you've seen in the videos, my desktop is a little messy right now, but I like to have my main projects that I'm working with right there. You don't have to. You can put it in your documents. It doesn't really matter, just as long as you know where this is. So you could browse if you want. You can click browse, decide, okay, do I want it in documents? Do I want it in desktop, in downloads? I wouldn't recommend downloads, but you know, you do you, right? So I always put my projects in my desktop, and then we're going to create our project. So what it's gonna do is it'll pause for a little bit, it'll restart, and it's opening me up with a fresh project. So now I can navigate and make sure that we're in the right directory. By that I mean I like to just go over here and I like to click Set as Working Directory. So now my address, everything up until the smallest unit of information, which is, you know, the street address or the apartment number, is set. So I've set that, you know, I'm in Massachusetts, I'm in Amherst, I'm in the zip code, right? I tell it, okay, the first part of that path I now don't have to write manually because it's already here. Now the only path I would need would be to write the file name. So let's say, you know, I had a data set called cars.csv. I'd only need to read in cars.csv. This is where a lot of issues can happen if you're trying to read in data. It might just be that you're not at the right address. So one of my favorite practices, it's a little bit redundant, but I like to do this, is every time I open up my project, I decide what folder I want to work into, and I click Set as Working Directory. Now, when you're in this project, and this is likely going to be your first project, so you're likely only going to have this one. As you can see, I've got a lot of different ones. I always like to make sure I'm in the right one, so I know that I want to be in Summer 24 Session 2 for DAX 601, and you can create your files here. So let's create an R script. R scripts are, I'm going to be using a lot of R scripts for the examples done in class because they're just a little bit quicker and cleaner to write if I just want to get, you know, something basic across. So again, let's call this test document because I'm just testing out my directory, and let's just print hello world. Super basic, very basic script right here. What I can do is I can save it. I can click File, Save As, and it's going to pop up where it's already in this DAX Session 2 folder. I'm going to call this test document, descriptive of what it is. This is just me testing out and showing you as an example. Now this pops up in Session 2, in my main 601 folder. You do not need to create, you don't need to go through this process again, unless you're starting a new class or starting a new project or something like that. You only have to do it once, and then you just want all of your files to go in here. You can create a subfolder. So I'm going to create a folder called Data, and that's where I'm going to put all of the data sets. And so for that, I would just want to set this as my working directory. And then I can just pull in data from this folder. What you're going to want is anytime you download new data or a challenge file, what you're going to do is drag it from wherever the downloads you're going to drag it into this main folder. So you see how I have a bunch of different folders. Now we can open up Summer Session 2. We're just going to do like you would drag files any other way. You're going to move the files from our classroom from your downloads folder into this 601 folder. Once you do that, then it's going to pop up in here in your 601 working directory. If you have questions about this, if you have issues with this, please let us know, because I want to make sure that this is worked out for you quickly. It's going to save a lot of headaches if we make sure your working directory is set up properly from the get-go. So go ahead and try this on your own. Go back through the video, follow along the steps that I did, and then see if you can create your own 601 folder. Let's go back to our slides. So that's just the basic. We've created our 601 project. That's great. The next thing is a Quarto document. Oh, the next thing is getting help, excuse me. So let's say you're a little confused on a function, or you don't know what all is in the Penguins data set that I referenced earlier. You can type in a question mark in the console, and I also encourage you to really make use of the textbooks that I've provided. So we have 3 in this syllabus that I've referenced from. Go to each of them and just type in keywords of what you're confused with, because maybe one textbook will explain it in a way that makes more sense to you than the one that I assigned. Again, Piazza, your errors, I want you to send screenshots, I want you to be asking questions, because they're probably questions that other people are encountering. And then, as your book says, Google is your friend. Coding is really, really rooted in troubleshooting. Okay, I know that this function does this thing. Can I apply it to my particular data or my particular problem? And so Google's your friend. Stack Overflow is your friend. These things are encouraged. Be sure to add R to your query, just so that way it produces examples in R as opposed to other coding languages. And I want to make a note for ChatGPT as well. ChatGPT can be helpful for coding, but I really discourage it at this stage. ChatGPT sometimes produces wrong code that it's going to be hard for you to understand if you don't have the background and know the language well. You're not going to be able to know where ChatGPT goes wrong. And in general, it's really important for you to build your own foundation, for you to build your own understanding of how coding and thinking computationally works. So I really, really, really don't want you to be using ChatGPT for any of this. I'd rather you be looking up specific functions, or things like, how do I create a new column and a data frame in R? That's where I want you to be going. But always try with the textbooks first, because they have a lot of information in them, and you might be able to find a workable example there. If that doesn't work, Piazza, and then try going to Google. Those are all encouraged. Just really don't do ChatGPT, because it can get you in more trouble than it's worth. I'm also going to go through Quarto documents with you. So Quarto documents are structured so that you can combine prose, so text, so paragraphs, written descriptions, code chunks, and outputs like graphs and tables. And why they're so important is that they allow for reproducible code. This means that you can go back and you can rerun it again, and you can see exactly the steps that you took for each process. This is really helpful for if you're writing a journal article, or you're doing research for a company. You want to be able to go back, and if there are any mistakes, find them. You want to be able to explain the logic of everything that you're doing. So in this course, I'm pretty particular. I really want you to be commenting your code, and we'll go through that. And I want you to be describing your thought process. I want you to be documenting everything that you do, because in data science, you have to make choices, but you want to make sure that those choices are well explained. And so what we're going to do for that is we're going to use these Quarto documents where you can write out your paragraphs and your code chunks next to each other. The basics. Your file is going to end in QMD. I'm going to go through and show you. We're going to create one, and we'll see in our working directory that it's going to show up with .qmd. There's also a YAML header, which is a markdown language. It essentially just assigns metadata to your document, like your name and the date. Your code chunks are going to start and end with these back ticks. You can find it on your keyboard. It's usually up by the numbers. You can use headings and italics, and in fact, I'm going to ask you to use those in your very first challenge. And then your document can render to an HTML, a PDF, or a Word document. So there's a bunch of different outputs that you can use. In this class, we're going to use HTML. And HTML essentially just means it's going to pop up in your web browser. So those are the basics. You have to make sure that your header has your name and the date. Your code chunks start and end with those backticks with no spaces before them, and then you can format things to be pretty. Some tips. Make sure that you always put your name on the document. You want it to say that this was authored by you. And you want to double check what it looks like when it's rendered. I'm going to give you an example, so don't worry, but just make sure you're rendering early and often, so that way when you turn in your final product, there's nothing that looks weird. You've caught it, you've fixed it ahead of time. This is a really important one. You never want to have spaces before the backticks of a code chunk. All of your code should be starting on the left. Now there are some indents, but the first line always needs to be flush to the left, no spaces in front of it. There's two different editors. The visual editor I think is great to adjust your text formatting, but your source editor is going to be great for writing code. So I'll show you how to switch between the two. Writing code in the source editor is great because there's line numbers. So if there's errors, it'll say, line 100, and you can go and find that exactly. But if you want to get your bulleted lists or a heading or italices or whatever correct, you can use the visual editor for that. And then when you go back to source editor, it'll show you how to manually do those things. So let's create a practice Quarto document, and then that's the end of this video. Your challenge 1 does go through in depth how to do this. My goal for challenge 1 is to just make sure that you're comfortable in the environment. So what we're gonna do up here is we're just gonna click Quarto document, and it's going to pop up with this window. Click document, title it. I'm titling this as just test Quarto. It's just practice, it's just showing you how this works. And I'm putting in my name as the author. I want to make sure that it turns into an HTML, and I'm going to hit create. Because I typed my name in as author, it's already populated there. In your challenges, we have your name here, so you're going to have to edit it and make sure that your name is represented. You can play with the settings up here. I've adjusted some of them for you in the challenges. For now, I'm just going to do this. I always like having my date as last rendered. It'll pop up last edited when you last interacted with the document. And then you can see here that there's headings and bold. What we're looking at is the visual editor. So here we can see that I can go through here. I can type in, I can click on header 1 and say example heading 1. And it'll pop up here in my outline. When I go to source, this shows what I mean by the code chunks. So here, the backticks followed by R in the squiggly brackets, this is where your code is going to generate. So you can hit run. 2 is going to pop out right below, as opposed to with this test document, when I print out hello world, it doesn't print on the next line, it prints down here in the console. Whereas in our Quarto documents, the output is right below the code chunk. So you can play around with those settings a little bit, but what I want to show you is saving and rendering. I always, you title it test Quarto, but then I always like to hit save, and I title it the same thing. So I make sure it's descriptive, and now it's going to pop up, or it should. Let's double check that I saved it as in the right spot. See what happened is it popped into the data folder, because that is what I last set my working directory to. So let's go ahead and put it up here in our overarching working directory, our 601 session 2. Here it is. So it pops up here. You see it has a QMD file type ending. So I didn't have to manually type in QMD, it did that automatically. So let's say, okay, we've gone our example heading, we have our code chunks. What we're going to do next is click on render. So render is going to pop up in my browser. And here we see the example heading 1 that I popped in. I have the wrong argument for the date, so let's go and check that. Here, I'm gonna sneak, and I've saved the challenges just to my desktop. Date last modified, okay, that was the issue. So we're gonna easily just go back to our document. Actually, let's open it up. We're gonna navigate back to our session 2. Get back there. Great. Open up our session 2, and we're gonna last modified. Let's try rendering this now. So that's an example of troubleshooting on the fly, right? I realized that something was wrong. I very easily went back and fixed it, and now here we are. It's published last on July 8th, right as we are now. So why I advocate for you to render early and often is I immediately caught that. It was an easy fix, and now I don't have to go back at the very end and try to fix small mistakes. But what you can see is you get a really beautiful output here that has headings and then the code chunks right next to each other. So let's say I exit out of this, but oh, I want to go back and I don't want to have to re-render anything. You can click on the HTML file, click on it, and click View in Web Browser, and it'll pop right back up for you. So when you first hit render, it automatically generates the HTML, and that's what you're going to be submitting for your challenges. So what I want you to do is I want you to make your own 601 directory. Then I want you to download the challenge 1 Quarto document, the QMB document, and I want you to put it in this summer 601 folder that you've created. Then I want you to edit it and just render it right away. I want you to make sure that you save it properly, render it, and look and see the output. If you have errors, reach out to me or one of the TAs or on Piazza, and we want to make sure that we're up and running with your ability to render. But that's the basics of the environment that we're working with. You can play around with adding in code chunks. So let's say I want to add in a new code chunk here. I'm just going to click on this +C button. My classic print hello world. Great. If I want to assign this to a variable, let's do that. What this is going to do is it's going to pop up this hello up in my environment. I've assigned a variable. Here it is. It's going to pull it out, and then when we click render, now we're going to see a new code chunk on the document that has hello world at the end. So play around with this, make sure that you feel comfortable in the environment, make sure that you change everything to have your name on it, and that's it. That's it for this video, and I'll see you next time in the next video with R Basics.